Hi, I'm David Colodney, and I'm here talking with Anuradha Bhowmik, a poet who has just won the 2021 Agnes Lynch Starrett Poetry Prize. Anuradha is a Bangladeshi American poet and writer from South Jersey who currently lives and works in Philadelphia. She is a 2022 Kudaman Fellow and a 2018 AWP Intro Journals Project winner in poetry. Her poetry and prose have appeared in Poetry, The Sun, Copper Nickel, Indiana Review, and elsewhere. She earned her MFA from Virginia Tech, and she has received awards from the Kimmel Harding Nelson Center for the Arts, the Fine Arts Work Center in Provincetown, and Frost Place, among others. Anuradha, welcome. It's great to see you. It's great to talk to you.
Hey, thanks for having me. I like all the books in the back. So
Well, there's books and records, so
yeah.
it's a good backdrop, and I actually listened to the records. Um, I'd love for you to start off by reading a couple of poems.
Okay. Um, I will start. I'll read two poems. The first one is usually the one that I start readings with, since it's about pronouncing my name, and it's the first poem in my book as well. Okay, so this is Elegy 1998. I first heard the American pronunciation of my name in kindergarten. We practiced handwriting with chunky Ticonderoga pencils and three-line paper, two solid green lines with red dashes in between. I wrote Onu over and over. My doc nom at home meant bright star in Bangla. My blonde bob teacher wrote INC for I incomplete, attached Radha in red pen. You need to practice writing your name, Anuradha. Radha was the Hindu goddess of love and good luck. I told the teacher my name was Anuradha, Onu for short. Don't talk back to me. The first language I spoke had 11 vowels. Ma and Baba spoke broken Bangla English. They mailed letters to Bangladesh in orange envelopes. The return address in jumbled capital in lowercase, extra loops and curls in the letters. I learned about abbreviation. When I got my first B in handwriting, the report card comments noted U for unsatisfactory. I practiced my penmanship till the letters straightened, the pages clean of eraser residue. I crafted my American name inside Lisa Frank folders, wore a Barbie clip in my black hair for the Life Touch portrait. I lost the aspirated last syllable of my name when I was 6. In the American alphabet, it did not exist.
It's great. It's great. One more?
Yeah. Okay, so this next one, I think I wrote it when I was still like 22. I think it was one of the first ones that I turned into my grad school workshop as well when I went to my MFA program. Model minority, Northfield, New Jersey. Bengali girls couldn't have crushes in 4th grade, and I was afraid to make eye contact with the white boy in accelerated math who wore and1 attire with Nikes, seated behind the hand crank pencil sharpener that I'd pass to turn in my problem-solving worksheet, face down in the letter tray beside the overhead projector. I took a dip in the communal cup of dull-tipped Ticonderogas to delay the walk of shame back to my desk, where I'd trace his name on the tabletop with a bare fingertip and wipe the wood clean. Fists clamped with guilt for having girl-boy fantasies during the similar shapes lesson. I pictured our names on popsicle sticks, pulled from the teacher's mug, making us partners for pegboard geometry. First period spent stretching rubber bands into symmetrical shapes. I tried to forget the probability of facing the wooden spoon at home if I lost points again, daydreaming during the next time test. Brown kids didn't get B's in math. So I waited till bedtime to practice kissing the talking geosafari globe that gave geography lessons during our mouth-to-mouth contact. When it was turned on and I paused to think, it whistled to make sure I was paying attention to the game. I'd never be a candygram girl, but I dropped hints in class, hiking the Hanes panties inches above the waistband of my mud jeans, hoping the AN1 white boy would see past the gifted and talented, spot the cotton with a Pocahontas print, and eventually agree to be my John Smith.
Great. Thank you. The book's called Brown Girl Chromatography. Can you tell me a little bit about the title? And it's got a wonderful cover, by the way. It's beautiful. Tell me about the title.
So I remember when I had picked the title, it was it was like one of those deadlines for grad school. And for that reason, I appreciate my MFA since it forced me to like, turn in certain things on time and like determine what my title would be on time. And at that time I was really into like watching YouTube videos for like makeup and everything. Since I yeah, that's what I would do back then for fun when I was like sad in Blacksburg. But I remember one of the makeup um influencers that I was listening to, she mentioned the MAC graphic pencil. And then that reminded me of when I used to do like paper chromatography back in like this science camp I did when I was like in third grade. So then when I looked up the definition of chromatography and how it was about the like separation of like pigments, um, then that reminded me of my own work and how it would my book was basically about breaking down the components of who I was, in both Bangladeshi and American terms, and also just physically um, and like personality wise, and also just like how I developed throughout time as from a child into my adulthood.
You write in the book a lot of the poems, especially early on, are about your childhood in growing up and a lot of the differences you felt, being a brown girl. Like, how hard was it for you growing up like that?
Um, it was really hard. It was really bad being a brown person after 9/11 when you're still like, and it was just around the time when like I was going through puberty and like having changes to myself. So, basically when 9/11 happened and people already like started um not trusting brown people because of the way they looked and making assumptions about them based on the way they looked. And it was also a time when I was most self-conscious about how I looked. It was definitely a time when I felt most that I didn't belong. And it probably is responsible a lot for why I turned to poetry, since it was something that gave me comfort. And it felt like something I could control, even though I couldn't control how people saw me after 9/11, and I couldn't control like the changes to my body. And I also couldn't control time passing as I was like growing up.
Has it gotten any easier for you as you've gotten to be a young adult?
So I would say, like in terms of being like a South Asian female in the world, I think that I had to like, you know, um be able to cope and also, know how to deal with racism. And obviously it's still a very difficult existence, but I still feel as though I'm like more equipped with survival skills versus when I was a child. So
What was the single biggest struggle you think you felt when you were coming of age in that time? I mean, there's a line in your poem, in one of your poems. I if I remember correctly, it's the first time I was called a terrorist. I think that's the actual line. What was like your biggest struggles? Was it social, fitting in?
I think it was kind of like a lot of what my book entails, like not being able to fit in among white peers and also not being accepted at home, trying to be American. And like because I always thought there was something flawed about being brown, and that's why my peers despised me so much. So I definitely think and especially like being a millennial growing up when 9/11 was part of our childhood, I think that that was something obviously that I wasn't able to control. I mean, I'm glad that at least now, like I think South Asians aren't seen as much of like the target for like um racial like targeting and all that, even though obviously I still experience racism on the day to day. But um I definitely think the fact that 9/11 happened when I was, when we moved to Northfield and when I was like growing up with my family. And that was also when I first started having like OCD and those symptoms that like no one understood, because my parents didn't understand like mental illness back then. It wasn't like talked about like we do today, about mental illness. So probably OCD was one of, and 9/11, those were two of the biggest factors that affected how I was able to cope, and also suffer in both like at school among my peers and with my family at home.
Yeah, I mean, it's really, I mean, 9/11 was particularly traumatic for everyone, and it's tough. And I guess you had mentioned earlier about poetry, kind of this what led you to poetry. What was do you remember the first time you encountered a poem that struck you, and what was it?
So I don't remember a particular poem, but I do remember that it was in fourth grade. It was when it was like accelerated like language arts, so it was like the gifted and talented class or whatever. And then our teacher wanted us to like write poems, and she had like a lot of cool stationery in her closet, so like that would encourage me to like write poems and just to have like I don't know, I ended up with like a couple hundred of them. They were like pretty bad obviously, but at least like I was doing something to feel like less alone back then. um I do remember I don't think I read it though. I do remember she recommended like a book of like Emily Dickinson's poems. But like I said, I don't even think I was like, old enough to kind of understand them. I could say like Where the Sidewalk Ends, but that's not really true because we just had to read that in school, and I can't even really remember anything from it. But I guess mostly my entrance into poetry was because like, I wanted to have something to work towards, even if it wasn't necessarily writing about my life, but I wanted to feel as though I was like working towards some goal because I wanted to write like a bunch of poems and stuff, like the most in the class and all that. And I also wanted to just be able to use like the pretty stationery, and that was a good excuse. So, yeah.
Yeah, I think poetry just kind of, I think it provides a natural outlet, reading it and writing it for, dealing with all sorts of stuff, the traumas of growing up and the traumas of being an adult, regardless. Um, it's funny you talked about your earliest poems, and I remember the first poem I attempted to write was about David Bowie, and it was all rhymey and stuff. It read like a terrible Hallmark card, and it was like I dreamed I saw David Bowie and he doesn't even know me or something was the opening line. It was absolutely terrible. Arguably the worst thing anybody has ever put to paper in the history of the human race. Um, but I digress. I guess bringing up Bowie though kind of leads me, and you don't specifically write about David Bowie, but there's a ton of pop culture references in your book. And I think it's a great linchpin to kind of link the poems together in the collection. What kind of role did pop culture play for you growing up?
I think pop culture especially was like when I think about like the objects that represent a lot of like tension between me and like my family, but also was like very appealing to like um my peers, are like the music videos that were on Yahoo. I just remember that was when you still had to use dial-up internet, and like I would get in trouble all the time because like you could tell if like someone couldn't call you because if you were on the internet, and then that would be like a source of frustration from my parents. And like I couldn't even like really sneak around to like be on the internet because they would know. And so that was a time in my life that I think like just being on the internet was becoming really big. And that's why, AOL Instant Messenger is something that was very much cemented into my childhood. And back then, there were also like a lot of posters in the magazines like J14, stuff that I don't really see anymore. So, and I think also as like a brown kid being like an immigrant, I was still looking for like figures in everyday life that I could like latch onto in order to learn how to be American, because like that wasn't something I was learning from my parents, and I didn't want to always feel like outcasted or like weird to my peers.
I was, I guess my initial thought on pop culture as a person growing up is that it could be, it is kind of a unifier, right? I guess it's something we can all watch the same videos and get the same thing out of it. Do you think that, your knowledge of pop culture helped, you growing up?
I do think that I think that knowledge of pop culture, even today, like probably for any generation, it's just something that marks what life was like back then. Because even now, like I didn't think about this until, because when I was writing these poems, a lot of them was when my age group was like, the primary generation that would like influence like the trends and stuff in everyday life. And then, obviously now like it's Gen Z, but I think that having those pop cultural objects in my poems is a way that like I'm still able to hold on to like my millennial childhood, which is obviously not the type of lifestyle that's like talked about um in the majority today. But I do think that it was something that did help me like try to assimilate into like American life, because it would also be like how I wanted to like do my hair and like how I wanted to dress and everything.
A couple of minutes ago, you talked about AOL Instant Messenger and stuff like that. And there's some of your poems in the book are like they're called receipts from AOL Instant Messenger, and I guess I'm going to have to describe it, but they I guess the part I wanted to ask you about was they almost look like dictionary definitions towards the bottom, and you spell out you define the word listed as a noun or verb, and then of every the first letter of every line is spells out the word. It's very unique, and it's very interesting, but it also, I think, helps break the book up a little bit. It seems like it kind of brings it into sections. Um, there's one on page 30 that's SMFD, um, which was really clever. And then I guess my question, and there is a question here, it's somewhere in my ramblings. Um, how did you come up with this idea to write in this particular form?
So this was during like my last semester in grad school, and I was very much like I really didn't like poetry that much anymore, and I really needed something to make it still feel exciting to me, and also like a form that would like make me want to write, because I was also like very depressed and like not necessarily like in a creating mood. So by having these restrictions, and I also wanted to always write something in footnote form, because I thought it looks like really cool whenever people put those in their writing. And I would also just think about like acrostics and how that was something that primarily got me into poetry when I was a child. And got me excited about poetry. These were things that I wanted to be able to use in my work, so that ultimately I still wanted to engage with the genre, because unfortunately, I do think grad school made me like not like poetry. I have an okay relationship with it now, because like I'm not no longer in grad school, and I'm glad that like my book exists, and like, because like I was worried when I first came out with this form. I'm glad I wasn't in workshop, because I think people would just be like, "Oh my God, you're doing too much," and like not provide any constructive feedback. So I'm glad, but I am glad that the professors I had were like very open to it, and they thought it was actually something, cool and novel that I was trying, and not like something that needed to be tamed or like made more controlled, or more normalized to like whatever other poetic forms that are usually brought in during workshop, or what's like currently published and stuff.
It's interesting. Grad school is a grind. I mean, it's like, those of us who've gone and gotten MFAs and stuff, I think a lot of us have sort of mixed feelings towards it. I mean, yes, there's a cost involved, but it's also quite the grind. Like you've got to force yourself to be productive. And you mentioned meeting deadlines and stuff. It's it's really hard to crank out X amount of poems and X amount of words of any sort of quality on that kind of deadline. Um, you've mentioned you've kind of eased up your feelings on that. Is there anything that triggered it, like the easing of your ambivalence towards your grad school experience?
So, I would, and I don't even think there's me like talking shit because it's not like everyone in grad school didn't know how I felt. I remember back then I would very much question like, why did I get an MFA? Like, should I have done like something else? Like, should I have listened to people when they said don't go to grad school to your MFA program right out of undergrad? Um, and like, the environment of Blacksburg, it was very isolating because it was just a very white town. And I know like the undergrads really like it when they're there, but it just wasn't a vibe for me as like, a grad student there in the English building, which was like the ugliest building on campus, like isolated from everything else on campus, um, in this like STEM school. And I think about it more as like, I don't know. Okay, so I still can't say that I was like happy when I was in grad school, but just like the fact that I was there, it did give me like funded time to like work on my book. Because Virginia Tech, even though like I wasn't the happiest there, at least had like a funded MFA program. So and it's definitely harder when you enter the workforce to be able to make time to be like writing. And I definitely know that my book wouldn't exist unless I was in an MFA program when I was like, forced to meet deadlines and like try different forms. So I do think it was the best decision for me at that time in my life, even though like at the time I very much was like very miserable. But just the fact, like when I put my emotions aside, I do think that it was a valuable time in my life because I didn't have to work and I could like my primary focus was like writing and like teaching as well. But like it's definitely a unique experience. I could see why people get an MFA later in life because um because obviously like I was very much broke when I was in my MFA program, but like when you do like have some experience in the world and like you can like save up and like you have more to write about. I can see why they go back to their programs later on, especially if they finally are in a point in their life where they can make time for it. Because I definitely think that was the best time for me to go to grad school, be forced to write poems that were in line with like some of the ones I wrote in undergrad. And like I said, I don't think I'd be able to have this book here unless I did have like the structure and like the requirements of grad school, because then that also forced me to like talk about my feelings and stuff, even if I didn't want to, because I knew I wanted to feel like I was working towards something. And it's not like everyone wants to like go out of their way to like write about their trauma all the time. And I think that was something that my MFA program did push me to do that I don't think I would have done otherwise.
And the result was this book, which is phenomenal and won an award. Tell me what it was like when you found out you had won.
Okay, so this was like during a work meeting over like Zoom and like but like I didn't have my camera on, or it was like Microsoft Teams, whatever. Um and like they were talking about something, there was like a PowerPoint going on, and like I have trouble paying attention, so I was like looking at my like email and stuff. And then there was like an email that like the subject line was like stare at prize, and I was like, okay, like there's gonna be a rejection, like whatever, like because that usually that's what it is, like when you get like emails like that. And then when it said that I won and stuff, because also like I was not expecting this, because I knew this one like the prize was like a bit bigger, and um like it asked me to write like a CV when I turned it in, and like it was like a few minutes before the deadline, and I didn't put like a CV. I just like put my resume with like some stuff, because I was like, that's some grown up stuff. I don't have time to like convert this into a CV. So I figured that just like automatically like put me out of the running and stuff. So obviously I was very much shocked when I got it. I was also very happy, but it took me a really long time to like accept that it actually happened, because because I was just like, whatever. Like, of course, I dreamt of like winning a first book prize, like ever since. That was what I wanted, like even while I was working on my book and stuff. So obviously it was like very nice, but I didn't think that I was going to get it. I also am just not one of those people who thinks that they're automatically going to win something, because I think that's weird and like also makes you look stupid if you don't win. So like, but I'm really glad it happened. And like I said, I didn't think that I was going to get it. And I do think with a lot of times the prize is based on like who's reading your work, whether it vibes with like what they like in poetry. But I was really glad that Aaron Smith picked my book, and he was very nice about it. And for like my launch reading, we were able to like do like a Q&A together, and I thought it was really great. I'm glad that the circumstances of my life came together like that, even though I like submitted my application for this like 2 minutes before midnight or whatever. So I'm glad though. Like obviously I'm happy, but I didn't think I was gonna get it. So like
I keep thinking, I keep having this image of you like in a boring work meeting, and then you're just kind of like looking at your emails and stuff, and then seeing this news. I mean, it's probably a good thing your camera wasn't on, and I mean, it's like, they might have seen you jump out of your chair.
yeah. And then part of me wondered, like, do I have like issues? Because I didn't like, I didn't like jump out of my chair and stuff. I just kind of looked at my phone and I was like, having some feelings. And then I was like, texting with my coworker who we like, maybe talk shit during some of the meetings, like,
Mhm.
during text and stuff. And I was like, hey, you're the first person I told, but my book's gonna get published and whatever. So it was like that. And then eventually I did like text my other friends and stuff. But I don't know. And but obviously it's something that like one of the most like memorable moments in my life. But like I said, but I didn't expect to like get it because I'm just the kind of person that like, I would rather just think that like the worst is going to happen than like that I would win stuff. So, but I'm really grateful for it. So,
Yeah, that's awesome. No, that's awesome. Congratulations, and the book is deserving of it. Um, the I guess the last two poems in the book, when I read them, it's I tried to be a good Bangladeshi girl, and first comes poetry, then comes makeup, and in that order. Um, I found them to be a little bit different than a lot of the other poems in the book. Like they almost seemed like more of a manifesto type, maybe looking forward a little bit. Um, and the very, very last line in the book is this is something I can control, which I thought was very significant. Um, were these last couple of poems written around the same time as the others, or what's the story behind those?
so it's interesting that you say that because a lot of times if I decide to like read the very last poem, which happens like most of the time when I do these readings, I almost always read I try to be a good Bangladeshi girl right before. Like I almost like pair them together, even though they are like, structurally very different.
Mhm.
Um and but I wrote first comes poetry, then comes makeup. Like I want to say it was like when I was at the Kimmel Harding Nelson Center for like the residency. And so how old was I then? I think I was like 20s. No, 24. I think I was 24 then. So that's when I wrote this. And I try to be a good Bangladeshi girl. This is probably one of the last ones I wrote while I was still in grad school. It may have been, yeah, it's definitely one of the last ones I wrote. And usually I don't write like stuff like this where it's like in couplets and like when like the poems starts with like the title and everything. So they were like written very far apart, like, probably like a year and like some months apart. But I do, whenever I read these, I put them together, even though they're also about like different things and like
Mhm.
about like different times in my life. But I think at least I try to be a good Bangladeshi girl gives a lot of like instances of like these very hurtful moments that I had mentioned earlier in the book, and it kind of like offers them together, right before the end poem. So
Mhm. Yeah, no, they something about the two of them together just works really, really well together. Um, who, as a poet, like who are your biggest influences?
so I would mostly say, okay, so like, I don't know if this is a disappointing response, but it's not usually like poets that inspire me. It's more like creative nonfiction. A book that I've always loved is like My Body is a Book of Rules by Alyssa Washuda. And like she does like some really cool stuff with like there's like an essay in there where she formats like one of her essays as like a dating profile. And that I think that probably influenced like, the AOL poems and like wanting to try like new stuff in my poetry. So definitely I think that probably was a very heavy influence on my work, because the rest of it I think would be just like being in workshop and like wanting to try like just seeing like we would like read stuff, and if it had like smaller stanzas, that's something I would want to do, just because I'm like I should try new stuff. But it wasn't necessarily because I was like drawn to a specific poet's work. But that was one book I definitely held on to for a very long time. I had like quotes of hers like on my wall, and like that probably would be, I would say, was like the strongest influence for my work. And I'm trying to look through this now and stuff, and even like the field notes poems and stuff, I'm not sure exactly where the inspiration for those came from. I think it was more so like I just was like really struggling to write about some stuff, and those seemed like the easiest way I could like write about them in a prose form without like trying to make them sound like pretty and stuff. Because I also wanted to write like a list poem, but I can't necessarily say that there's like a specific poet that comes to mind when I do that. So yeah, but Alyssa Washuda, I think she's great. And like one time she came into Philly and she signed my book, and I was like gonna tell her like how much like her book like changed me and stuff, but then I was like feeling like I think I was a little drunk, and I was just like, I'll just talk to her another time. So
Yeah. Oh, understood. So do you have like favorite poets that you like to read?
so there are okay. So one reason I was really excited about winning this prize, but also another reason why I thought I wasn't gonna win this prize, was because like Nate Marshall won it for like Wild Hundreds, and like I love that book. Like that's like a book I would recommend to people who like aren't even like into poetry, maybe have never read like a poetry book before, because it's very accessible. I love like the like the love letters and stuff he has in that book. So that's definitely a work I really like. And then I really liked when like Libby had his second book for free for like the audiobook, and I was like so excited. And like I was worried that like poetry books wouldn't sound or read as well when they're like in audiobook form, but it was like great to hear it in his voice when he was reading it. So I really like his work. um and I also think Sharon Olds is cool. I can't say that I can't like say that I like ride or die for her, because I didn't read enough of her stuff to like, and I don't want to like be like, I got to meet her in real life too, and she's so nice. But like, I really like how her work is also like accessible, and she just says like directly about like how she feels, and like, and like me, I think she says some stuff that people would think that you have to be protective of or like embarrassed of. And I like that she just like directly puts it out there. So, and she also writes about like family trauma and stuff. So I appreciate that about her too. Those are the two poets that come to mind right now. But, I'm also always like, the thing I have with poetry is that like, I don't know if other people feel this way, but I feel this way. Like I can understand why people maybe don't purchase poetry books as like their one go-to like when they buy books, because I even feel like, and I got my MFA and like I did like whatever, and like I wrote a book too, but like I sometimes like very often like when I read a book of poetry, I don't know what the person's trying to say, so like I have to read a poem again like 4 times. And I can understand if like not a lot of people have that type of patience, and like that was something I didn't want to do with my book. Like I wanted it to be accessible to like anyone, like not just someone who was like within like the world of poetry, because I wanted people to know what I was talking about. And like I'm just being honest, sometimes poetry makes me feel like I'm inadequate in some way in the way that I think about things. And so that's why I like poets who write like Sharon Olds and Nate Marshall, because they write like accessibly.
I think that's such a that's I feel the same way. I mean, I think it's a really valid criticism of a lot of obscure. I think sometimes poets tend to want to be obscure, and gives them more. I'm not sure what the word is, but I would much rather not have to read a poem 4 or 5 times to figure out what the poet's trying to tell me. So, I completely understand. What's next for you? What are you working on now?
So I am working on some poems for like a second book. It's really, I don't know, I think it's kind of weird because, well, it's not weird. I'm sure like a lot of people feel this way because like when I write my second book, and I feel like people who just released their first book, they don't have to like immediately like think about the second book they're gonna write and like stuff, but like um it's something that I don't know, it's just the way that I think about now since my first book came out. But I am writing like a series of poems that because I was like worried that like, with my AOL and messenger poems, like people are gonna be like, ew, like why is she like, using like that same form in like a second book? But I was able to think about it in a way that like, I don't want to like say what it's about, but like it was an interest I have and it uses definitions, but it's not in the same way that it does in like the AOL Instant Messenger poems. So I'm excited about that. Like I said, it's good to be excited about things when it comes to poetry because a lot of times like it just makes me like, feel like I'm stupid or like just makes me feel like I don't want to write it anymore. So I'm glad that like, I have a series of poems that are similar to that for my second book.
Cool. Cool. I certainly look forward to it. And thank you for spending some time this morning talking about your book. The poet is Anuradha Bhowmik. The book is Brown Girl Chromatography. It's fantastic. Thanks so much.
Yeah, thanks. Do you want me to read a second poem or like I don't know?
Oh yeah, read another one.
Okay. I hope it's still recording. That would be funny. But
It is recording.
1 second. Let me just drink some water.
Yeah. It's good to see you, by the way.
You too. I fall off the face of the earth sometimes. So I'm glad that that you're still in one piece. I'm still in one piece. So
Barely, but yeah.
I hope I see you at the book fair though.
I'll definitely. I'll see you.
Okay. So this is the last poem I'm going to read. I really don't have like a favorite poem when it comes to my book, but a lot of people seem to always really like this poem, so that's why I'm going to read it. But it also is one that like authentically like reads in my voice and like kind of the person I am now, as opposed to like a lot of my earlier poems were written when I was much younger and like the childhood voice is much more apparent there. So this is First Comes Poetry, Then Comes Makeup. I can't say I hate what I see in the mirror, and no, I don't make my face flawless for the male gaze that can't even detect the difference between Max Ruby Woo and Russian Red. And yes, I have a women's studies degree, and yes, I was informed that the beauty industry supports patriarchy and shames female aging. And while I consider that to be more of a white feminist fixation, makeup as my own shit, my second art, the perfect counterpart to my alter ego, the beauty addict, the bad bitch, the freak, and yes, this obsession stems from respectability politics and being born a brown female who happens to like women. And yes, a brown female is in fact chained to compulsory heterosexuality in its most restrictive form. I know the terms and conditions, the burden of this body. Please forgive me for the disconnect between my outer and inner selves, for my permanent mental violence. My second art is the closest I'll ever get to having any other body, any other life than this one. And when brown heteropatriarchy coerces me to marry a man, I refuse to compromise on my plot to marry a tall motherfucker who will be hot enough to hold my hand in public and rich enough to subsidize my trips to Ulta and Sephora without hesitation. My type of man is wealth, status, reputation. My man is the perfect counterpart to this body set to atrophy. If my second art was meant for men, then this consumer-driven coping mechanism would be less about femmes and more about manipulating him and him and him in his own world repeatedly. But first comes writing. The first art allows for direct access into the limbic system. After my first art parses my archaeology, my second art keeps me sane. It tames my ingrained guilt, the conflagration in my poet brain that tells me that if God is real, he fucking hates me, and every man that could have or couldn't love me fucking hates me, and I don't deserve anything I've ever wanted. My second art is mechanical. It follows procedure, while my body and my brain remain insubordinate. Human beings adopt countless methods for survival to temporarily tolerate distress. My second art keeps me gloss. Preserve this glaze. I am not whole, and I do not know which version of myself to accept, and no, this is not sustainable. And yes, this is a man's world, and yes, my second art is still mine. My Bobby Brown skin foundation, my Urban Decay perversion mascara, my Glossier boy brow, my mouth painted androgyny, my trophy wife highlight, my frat boy blush, my matte black stay all day cat eye, my cocoa contour chiseled to perfection, my face beat for the gods. My holy grail beauty products are my royal protectors. See my vanity? This is my kingdom. This is something I can control.
I love that poem. Thank you. That's great. Thanks again. Appreciate it. I'll see you in a couple of weeks.
Okay. Anyway, thanks again for talking to me, you guys.
Oh my God, Anuradha, what a poem.
Oh,
That's
thanks.
absolutely incredible. Thank you both. It's just been a wonderful time listening to you. And oh my word, I really hope to see you in Miami. Thank you so much.
Yeah. Okay.
Have a great one. Bye-bye.
Goodbye.
Oh,
Right.
thanks for talking to us. And yeah, we'll see you soon, I hope.